Okay. Hold on. I already messed up the video. Okay, this is the second video for our foldable. We are going to be, this is the tab we did yesterday, zero product property, and we are going to work on the next two today. So we're going to start by just labeling these tabs. The second one is going to be a left and right side. So the left side is labeled GCF and the right side is DOS for difference of squares. And the section number for this tab is 5.12b. And the section number for the next tab, also 5.12b. So we're doing two tabs today. And this second one is going to be labeled slide and divide. That one also has a left and right side. The left side is going to be when a equals 1, and the right side when a does not equal 1. And all three of these tabs are factoring. So what I like to do over all three of them is this bracket thing. And then on the side of it, I write factoring because the methods we're going to do after this are not factoring. All right, so lifting this tab up, we are going to do GCF and difference of squares. These are two different things. I like to divide them with a line down this way, but you don't have to. It's your foldable. So on the left, we are going to title it at the very top, greatest common factor. And that has two steps that we have reviewed in the, or that we learned in the past that we're going to review now. Divide out GCF and then write as GCF times leftovers in parentheses. We're going to do one example in this top color and then another example in the bottom color. So 3x squared minus 12x equals 0. The GCF here is 3 for the 3 and 12 and x for the x squared and the x. So there's two different sections there. We're going to divide out their GCF and we're not getting rid of the GCF. We're going to write it down. And then we're going to put the leftovers in the parentheses, what we have after dividing it out. So this is just a reverse distributive property. And then this is where our property from yesterday comes in, our zero product property. Now that it's in factored form, we break it up into individual equations, both of them set equal to 0, and then we solve those. The first one I solve by dividing by 3, so that gives me x equals 0. And the second one I solve by adding 4, x equals 4. And we have two solutions because this is a quadratic which has the highest exponent of 2. That highest power tells you how many solutions you have. And then I want you to try this problem by yourself. So after you write it down, pause your video and work it on your own. So here is my work. I divided out the 5x, set my factors equal to 0, and I had x equals 0 and x equals -7. So for this right side, we're going to do difference of squares. This is a completely different method. So all right, so up here, I want you to label this difference of squares. And difference means subtract and squares means perfect squares. So we had a formula for that when we did it in the past. A squared minus b squared equals a minus b times a plus b. So we're going to do one example up here and then a second one on the bottom. So 9 minus 25x squared equals 0. And the reason why we know we can do this formula here is everything you see is a perfect square. The 9, the 25, and the x squared. And how we did this before was we would square root each thing individually. So the square root of 9 is 3, and the square root of 25x squared is 5x. And we would take those square roots and make a minus version and a plus version. And that would be our factors. And now that it's in factored form, we do our zero product property, which says to set them each individually equal to 0. And now we just solve those. In both cases, we start by subtracting 3. And then dividing by negative 5. Well, in this first equation by negative 5. Now I have this fraction 3/5, and the number part can't be simplified, but I do have a negative divided by a negative, which becomes a positive 3/5. And then the second equation works the same way. You start by subtracting 3. And then this time I'll divide by a positive 5. And x equals negative 3/5. And then I want you to work this problem. M squared minus 81 equals 0. Go ahead and pause your video and try that one. All right, here is my work for example 2, 9 and negative 9. And then in this last example, we're actually combining GCF and difference of squares. (10x squared minus 640 equals 0. So we know it's not a difference of squares because 10 is not a perfect square and 640 is not a perfect square. But when I divide out a GCF of 10, I then have 10 times x squared minus 64 equals 0. And x squared and 64 are perfect squares that are being subtracted. So I can do difference of squares on both of them. So I square root this one, square root the second one. So I have x and I have 8. And I'm going to make a minus version and a plus version, or subtract and add. Now I still have the 10 up front, but there's, oh, I had an M from up top. The 10 on front does not have an x on it, so we do not have to set it equal to 0 because it doesn't represent a solution. If this 10 had an x, then just like our worksheet yesterday, we would have 10x equals 0. But it doesn't, so just ignore it. What you are going to do is the x minus 8 equal to 0, and the x plus 8 equals 0. And that's going to give me positive 8 for a solution and negative 8. All right, for this next tab, we are doing slide and divide. We're going to review for when a equals 1 and when a doesn't equal 1. And at the very top, I want you to write this in the middle because it goes for both the left side and the right side. This method is for trinomials that start out like this. Ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So on the left, well, let me write the problem first. Hold on. Example 1. X squared plus 11x plus 30 equals 0. X squared plus 11x plus 30 equals 0. When I say that this side is for a equals 1, I mean that this right here, and the coefficient for the x squared is 1. So when that happens, we start out like this. We make our cross, what multiplies to the last number and adds to the middle number. And we get 6 and 5. What we do with those is write our factors, x plus 6 times x plus 5, and we know that that equals 0. And now that we have these two factors multiplied and equal to 0, we do our zero product property, set them equal to 0, and solve. And I'm going to give you two problems to do on your own. They're just practicing with different signs. So example 2 is x squared plus x minus 12 equal to 0. And then example 3, x squared minus 15x plus 56 equals to 0. Pause your video and do those two problems on your own. All right, here is my work for those two problems. Pause your video if you need to check it with yours. All right, so on this right side, we are going to do examples when the a value is not 1. I'm going to do one example for you and then give you one to do by yourself. So example 1 here is 6x squared plus 13x plus 2 equals 0. So my a value is the 6 right here. So remember that this method is called slide and divide. So we start by taking the a and sliding it to the end and multiplying it by the 2. So that gives me x squared plus 13x plus 12 equals 0. And now I do the method from the left side. What multiplies to the last term 12 and adds to the middle of 13, and that's 1 and 12. So my factors are x plus 1 times x plus 12, and I don't set them equal to 0 yet. I divide out the 6 that I multiplied in the first step. So that's the divide part of the process. And that gives me two fractions, 12 over 6 and 1 over 6. So I can simplify the 12 over 6 to 2. 1 over 6 does not simplify. When that happens, you take the denominator and swing it up front. And so now I have my factors. I set them equal to 0 and solve them. In the first one, I subtract 1 to both sides and then divide by 6. And in the second one, I subtract 2. All right, so here's the one that I want you to do by yourself. Pause your video and then come back and check your work. 4m squared plus 5m minus 6 equals 0. All right, here's my work right here. I have -2 3/4. Who had that? Okay, excellent. And even myself, when I started working, my brain went to la la land and I forgot to do the divide part. So if you had -8 and +3 as your answers, then you forgot the divide by 4 part of the slide and divide. So just check your work on that.